Mark Skaar on the Skaar Kaard on 103.7 The Fox. Proud to welcome back Mr. Johnny O'Neill. John, how are you?
Excellent, Mark. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Glad to have you back on the show to talk about the third album, Brand New Day. It's out now. Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, and then thanks for having me back. It's my pleasure.
Last time we had you on, we were reminiscing about your days in Air Force playing in Mason City.
Yeah, there was a club down there, if I recall correctly, the Runaway.
Yep.
I suspect that it's probably no longer there,
no.
But yeah, some good times in Mason City, no doubt.
So let's talk about Brand New Day, a record that was recorded in between, my understanding, John, Winterland Studios in Minneapolis and the famous Pachyderm Studio in Cannon Falls.
Yeah, we did the first half of the album at Winterland, which no longer exists, unfortunately, but that was done in April of last year here in the Twin Cities. And then we were looking for a studio to cut the second half of the album, and did some research, and I've certainly heard about Pachyderm. It's a studio where Nirvana recorded In Utero, and Bly recorded Throwing Copper, Soul Asylum recorded Grave Dancers Union, so it had quite a storied past. But come to find out, this little studio exists in Cannon Falls, Minnesota, of all places, just a small rural town about 50 miles south of the Twin Cities, and we had the extremely good fortune to cut the second half of the album there, with my blood brother, Brian Bart, at the mixing helm, but just a fabulous experience, kind of surreal, actually. The grounds of the studio, in addition to the studio itself, there's actually I guess a resort is the best way to describe it. We stayed overnight, had a couple days tracking there, but there's an indoor pool and all kinds of neat stuff. I actually stayed in the Kurt Cobain bedroom. It was kind of a little eerie, but just a fabulous studio, and we certainly intend to go back there again.
Talking with Johnny O'Neill about Brand New Day. I'm sure that the pandemic informed a lot of this musically and certainly lyrically. Is that fair to assume?
Absolutely. We all have gone through a pretty tumultuous era these past few years, and living through the pandemic was quite surreal, but it gave us time as a band to actually really focus on writing and rehearsing and recording this album. We had our own little pandemic bubble, if you will, and spent a lot of time hunkered down writing tunes for the album, and really tried to make the most of the time that we had, given that live performance was out of the question. And also the album is the first recorded effort that features my full band. So we've got John Funk on lead guitar and my songwriting partner on a few tracks, Joe Becker, my drummer, who's been with me from the get-go, and then Benny Craig on bass. So it was really a great chance to have the whole band part of this effort. But in terms of just how that era affected the songwriting, we tried to release an album that rejuvenated people, gave people a sense of hope, acknowledging so many crazy things we've endured, but at the same time looking forward to the future with a sense of hope, and that better days are ahead, certainly. But that was the impetus for the overall theme of the record.
A lot of people might not know this, John, but you're also involved in clinical psychology of all things. And how does that type of thing interwoven into maybe some of the things that you're talking about, the topics on the record?
Yes, indeed. I lead a dual life. During the day, I'm Dr. John O'Neill. I'm a clinical forensic psychologist at private practice, and at night, Johnny O'Neill the rocker. But my day gig, so to speak, involves forensic work, legal work, primarily doing cases that involve claims, workers' comp and personal injury claims. But in regard to what happened with the unrest following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, there were dozens of Minneapolis police officers that filed claims for PTSD related to their law enforcement career. And so I did what are called independent psychological examinations of, I can't even begin to count how many police officers in Minneapolis, probably 50, 60 at least, interviewing them to assess the validity of their claims, and then I submit a report to the attorneys and so forth. But the last track on the album is called Tell Me Your Story, and that comes right from my experience as a clinical psychologist. It speaks from the point of a therapist. I no longer do therapy these days, but certainly the legal work that I do, I hear all kinds of stories, and it just really is an eye-opening experience to be able to sit in that chair and hear what people have experienced, and to try and have that inform my songwriting. The ending track is about being in the therapist chair and trying to engender a sense of trust and hope in a client who's really struggling with a lot of things, and oftentimes it's someone that's coming through that is reluctant to talk about what they're experiencing, and so trying to engender a sense of trust so that person can talk about their story in order for you to help them. But the events of 2020 onward certainly were of a major impact on the songwriting and themes of various songs and so forth. But again, we're trying to move ahead in a positive direction, acknowledging what we've been through, but yet there are good things in this world that happen too, that I think a lot of times so much of what people hear about are the negative things, but there's a lot of good in this world too, so I wanted to remind people of that.
Talking to Johnny O'Neill about Brand New Day, and I wanted to talk about song number 4, It's Too Hard to Say Goodbye, which was written by original Cheap Trick vocalist Zeno. I had Zeno on the air plugging the new Bad Boy record, and he had told me that you were recording something of his, and so let's talk about that.
Zeno, we go way back. Zeno actually was a singer in Dare Force, the band I had going with Brian Bart for years prior to my solo career, and Zeno was with us for a while, and as you mentioned, Mark, Zeno was the original lead singer in Cheap Trick. In fact, he and Robin Zander went to high school together, and there was an evening Dare Force was playing in St. Paul, and we had Robin Zander and his entourage come out to see us play. But It's Too Hard to Say Goodbye was a track that Zeno wrote while he was with Dare Force. We recorded the track at a studio called Blackberry Way, which was kind of later known for Twin Town Records. A lot of Twin Cities punk acts released albums on that label, but we recorded the track and never did anything else with it. It just sat on tape for years, and I was in the studio with Brian Bart, and we were talking about possible songs for the new album. And I had always thought this was a great song to record and thought that it'd be a good fit for the new album. So we breathed new life into it, did a little bit of rearranging with the track, but Zeno did just a fabulous job. It's certainly kind of a classic power ballad, if you will, but just a really well-written song, and it just seemed to fit nicely along with the other tracks on the record. So it was great to be able to. Some songs, there's a certain time and place for certain songs to raise up and say, hey, it's time for me now, and this was one of those kind of tracks, so it was really fun to give it some life.
Talking with Johnny O'Neill about Brand New Day, I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Don't Believe a Word, written by the late great Phil Lynott, and of course Thin Lizzy, originally found on the Johnny the Fox album.
Yes, of course. Thin Lizzy, just a huge influence on myself and my band. Of course, Phil Lynott, I think, is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. I think he's certainly not given the credit he's due, but just a fabulous songwriter. And then, of course, the band with the dual lead guitar setup was a huge influence on my approach to the two-guitar type of band. But again, this was a song that Dare Force had performed for years at gigs and so forth. And then when I put my band together, it just lent itself to the two-guitar attack that John and I have. And it just seemed to be another song that just fit really nicely with the other tracks. But being that I have a little bit of Irish in me myself, I wanted to pay homage to, I think, probably the greatest Irish rock and roller that ever was. Probably the only other person that comes to mind is Rory Gallagher, besides Mr. Lynott. But I had a chance to travel to Dublin a few years ago and took some pictures. There's a statue of Phil in Dublin, and I certainly made a trip to that. It's kind of a place of memorial for a lot of his fans. But he departed this planet way too early, but what he left behind was quite a legacy, to be sure.
There's more to Thin Lizzy than Whiskey in the Jar, Boys Are Back in Town, and Jailbreak, That's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. There's definitely a deep dive for anyone to check out. Just some excellent material, but well worth the time spent there.
Something else that I thought was cool, John, is the use of saxophone, piano, organ, violin. You have a nice mishmash of not just guitar, bass, drums, vocals, but other things too, and you brought in some people to color up the record that way.
Yes, one of the goals with the album was to really broaden the sonic landscape of the band. I think, the greatest bands are bands that have been able to tap into various genres and still maintain their identity. And the two bands that come first to mind in that regard would be Led Zeppelin and the Stones. I kind of tried to do a mash of those groups, with our own twist. But with that in mind, we really wanted to expand it beyond just what you might expect from a two-guitar hard rock band. So the third track features a cat by the name of Jason Peterson Dallaire, who is actually the touring saxophonist for Michael Bolton. He travels the world with Bolton's band. But anyway, Brian Bart, my co-producer, knows Jason, and I was looking for a sax guy to come in and play on the third track, which is My Mona, which is really a departure from stuff we've done before. It's the first collaboration that John Funk and I did as co-songwriters. But Jason came in, played a sax solo, and then it also plays organ and piano. So on that track alone, he played the sax solo, organ, and piano. We were definitely going for a Stones vibe on that track, and I asked him to channel Bobby Keys, who's just the superb, amazing saxophonist that the Stones had on their most famous records.
Mm-hmm.
He does the solo on Brown Sugar, for example. But Jason came in off the cuff, just knocked a world-class solo on sax, just knocked it out of the park on that. Also added organ and piano to that track, as well as a couple of other tracks in the album, Hands Up, and then the last track, Tell Me Your Story, which features two Jasons, Mr. Peterson Dallaire on organ and piano on that one, but also we brought in a violinist, Jason Wolf, to do some live violin tracks on the last song on the album, which is kind of a magnum opus, if you will. It's almost 8 minutes long, but I was stick to my guns and not going to, try and cut down a song to 4 minutes that deserved a longer length of time. But that one really covers the broad swath of territory regarding instrumentation and the dynamics of the song. Kind of my take on Stairway to Heaven, not that I'm, saying it's akin to Stairway to Heaven, but it has that kind of flavor in terms of starting out and the dynamics and building up as the tune progresses. But that song features live violin, and then Brian and I did some additional string arrangements around the track too. So just another example of it really trying to expand the musical palette and take listeners to places that they hadn't gone before with the band. So it's really cool. And then I have to mention, too, we had a guest vocalist on a couple of tracks who also happens to be one of our videographers, Brianna Jorgensen, who came in and did background vocals on My Mona and also on Brand New Day, the title track. And she is just superb. She and her husband are videographers, and they also have a band, the Jorgensens, in their own right, that is just stellar. So, but she contributed her voice to a couple tracks. So, yeah, we're just extremely proud of the effort, and certainly hope that listeners enjoy what we've provided for them to hear. But it was our privilege to have just world-class musicians with us in the studio. Just a fabulous crew.
John, if people want to get Brand New Day, they want to see tour dates, they want to keep up with the band, how can they best do that?
Well, a couple ways. I've got a Facebook site under Johnny O'Neill Official. You can certainly find out the latest there. Also, I have my own website, which is johnnyoneil.com, JohnnyOneil.com. And you can find tour dates, our videos, information about where to buy the album. The album's on all the streaming platforms, Spotify, Amazon, all those kinds of places. You can also we have the album out on both disc and vinyl, and you can go to bandcamp.com. We have a Bandcamp site that you can order the physical copies of the album. But streaming sites, the usual suspects there, and then ordering it through Bandcamp. But in terms of the band's activities, probably Facebook and then our website are probably the two best sources for that.
John, thank you so much for coming back and being our guest once again on the Skaar Kaard. We appreciate it. We look forward to tracking your progress throughout the rest of the year.
Well, Mark, it's been my pleasure, and thanks again for having me back on your show. It's always great talking to you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your summer.
That's Johnny O'Neill. I'm Mark Skaar. This is the Skaar Kaard, the new classic rock that rocks, on 103.7 The Fox.